Welcome back to the award-winning Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sara Payne, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. If you've been in health marketing long enough, you know there are moments when something shifts, not incrementally, but fundamentally. A new capability emerges, the language changes, expectations shift, and suddenly the old playbook doesn't work anymore, even if nobody has officially said that out loud yet. Today's conversation is about those moments, not the innovation itself, but what it feels like to lead through change when innovation moves faster than understanding, and the kind of leadership those moments demand from marketing. My guest today is Robin Goldsmith. Robin is the practice leader for Verizon's healthcare domain practice and brings more than 20 years of experience across patient engagement, healthcare media, data analytics, and digital transformation. He's worked inside organizations like Everyday Health, Patient Point, and CrossX. And today, he focuses on building solutions on top of Verizon's core infrastructure to accelerate digital transformation across healthcare. He's also the host of Healthcare on Air, a podcast by Verizon where he interviews leaders and innovators across the healthcare ecosystem. Robin brings a unique perspective, having seen healthcare marketing evolve from multiple vantage points, and I'm excited to dig into what he's learned along the way. Robin, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation because I know that you've had a front row seat to several moments when healthcare itself was changing in a pretty fundamental way. When you think back across your career, what was that first moment when you really realized, like, oh, wow, hey, the rules just changed?
Yeah, I think there's been a couple. It's good to be on a marketing podcast because that's where I started in healthcare. So thank you for having me. I think the big one that I first saw was at Everyday Health when we started playing around with programmatic advertising. So this idea of not just wide campaigns, but really starting to leverage data to be more specific on the audiences you're targeting. And then, that just, I added on to that when I had visibility into CrossX, which is obviously very data-driven measurement platforms. And I think it's just grown from there, where no longer is it the case where healthcare advertisers can really rely on these wide campaigns. It's very data driven, which I think it started, and that was probably 2016 where I started seeing that, maybe even earlier in that time frame.
Yeah, things change so rapidly with marketing technology these days. It's sometimes hard to even remember how long ago was that this change happened. As you reflect on some of those times of change, what did those moments really require from the people leading the work, marketing leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it goes back. I think we talked about this, whenever you launch a new way of doing things that goes against, and in hospital marketing, people have been doing the same thing for a long, long time. They've got, their channels, they've been working with the same people for maybe decades. And now you're throwing in a different way to do things. That's change. And that's always difficult, no matter what you're doing. But I think the thing those people had to think about, and what I got to work on, was how do we tell the story? I think it all comes down to how you tell that story of why is this important and how is this going to help your end customer at the end of the day. I think was listening to your 2026 predictions, it's all about the customer at the end of the day. I mean, that has to be, it's always been that way, but I think even more important now. But I think the initial, first of all, it's not easy. You have to step out of your comfort zone to tell have a different conversation with your customers. So I think with that, courage and the ability to weave a positive narrative and really weave that narrative with benefits for the customer, I think that regardless of any change, that's critical.
Yeah. What are maybe the things that surprised you most in going through big changes like that?
I'm a glass half full kind of guy, Sarah. So I always think people are going to go, just believe it on the first go. But I was surprised by the pushback, to change. And I think that's
Yeah.
stayed with me, that when change is hard for people. We know
Yes.
that, but I think until you experience it firsthand with people saying, I need, I need reference customers, that first customer, and then you have references and you build the groundswell. But yeah, a lot of pushback and a lot of people not really believing in, and at that point, it was really the power of data. And, yes, healthcare is super conservative when it comes to privacy. And of course they are, for every good reason. But yeah, the doubting was surprising to me.
Yeah. In some respect, it's not surprising, because if you say, like, people just hate change, like, as human beings, we're just not wired for it, right?
Yep.
And so there's that just sort of initial, like, oh, nope, there's pushback that's going to happen. But sometimes it can even be more like a much stronger pushback than
Yeah.
one may even anticipate.
I guess let me clarify. I think sometimes, no matter how good something is, if the market is not intrinsically ready for it, it is super challenging for marketers to market around that.
Yeah.
So I think that, there's this kind of balance of, do I push the market to evolve, or do I, how do I do that? How do I navigate those waters? So, a lot of innovation, if I'm going to innovate around healthcare marketing, is the market ready? Are they are there some Northern Light customers that are leading the charge? Those things all have to come into play. But I think when things fail, it is market readiness and telling, again, I always go back to storytelling. I think the market has to have some inkling that this is where everything's going.
Yeah. So let's focus on that a little bit deeper. Um, you know, and go back to sort of decisions that were being made around that time, and the philosophy and the approach is, how did you decide to move forward when you realized there was a gap in market readiness, right? Was there a, you mentioned education is a key component. Like, did you map a plan that's like, okay, we're going to give ourselves, there's going to be multiple phases to this, and so we're, phase one's going to focus more on education, and once we get the market to give us some signals or early indicators of XYZ, then we're ready for phase two.
Sure. So there's the initial kind of go-to-market strategy, and you make some assumptions that, you don't know for certainty what the response is going to be. But, at every one of those companies, I'm not going to go specifically on each one, but they share common traits where we built the go-to-market. We used data to understand. We did market analysis, looking at what, through our lens, through our experience, who would be the early adopters, some key agencies that were pretty progressive, who had shown some signs of leveraging these kind of capabilities around data to better target audiences. And you're right. Yeah. We built a plan of, how do we evangelize this to the market? What are the key events? What are the key, times and places we have to show up and have a voice? I think that was critical. And we had a runway. We had 18 months to really prove this out, I think, in both cases. And, luckily, the market was ready. And I think the adoption just accelerated, slow at first, but then you get some customers utilizing it, and then it's word of mouth, and then you have a market to build on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that runway is key, as you mentioned. As I'm trying to understand if there's anything else, in the work that people don't see, right? It's the internal planning and the work and figuring things out. Is there anything in terms of um, th- things that your team spent time on that wasn't obvious from the outside, but was really critical to getting momentum and trust with customers?
Yeah, I think the key word in there is trust. Um, so we had trust with a lot of customers to begin with. So that's a good footing to begin anything on, is trust. Coming from zero and building trust, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But I think you have to kind of build in these scenarios and, leveraging data and understanding, really mapping out what are the objections we know are going to be most top of mind. Get into the heads of who you're speaking to and really, go through those scenarios of, we know what these people are going to say, because I would probably say the same thing if I was coming to them with a new way of doing things. So map out those conversations, build a narrative, I think is critical. And then we had, different, a slate of options for people to try. It wasn't just, all in on this strategy. It's giving folks the ability to test, I think, is critical in marketing. I mean, marketers love to test, A/B testing and everything else, but I think being able to provide an easy on-ramp to test in small, incremental steps was, I think, why we succeeded. And then why we didn't succeed at another company I worked at, which, I'm not going to say these are all successful. Whenever you're innovating,
that's where we learn.
Oftentimes it doesn't work. Priorities change, which happened. And, it was looking good. And then the priorities of the company changed. And so things that are out of things that you can't plan for can always come into play to shake up the chessboard without even, you've ever thought about that scenario happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And I love the honesty in that too, right? Because not everything is gonna hit, right?
Nope.
And some of those things are outside of our control.
Yep.
You mentioned education being key. You also talked about the importance of building a narrative, unpacking both of those things. When you say education, what does good look like to you around that when we're talking about, educating around some major change management?
Yeah. I mean, educating, I hate to take a tone of, I know more than you, but it in that capacity, you don't want to come from that position. I think it's just sharing of viewpoints, and success looks like to me that after hopefully one conversation, but oftentimes it takes more, that person who you're relaying this information to can speak that back to you, which is often the case, because you know how it is, sir. You need a champion at every organization, and that champion then has to go talk to other people and explain it to them. So,
right.
And the best scenario is when you're in a meeting and that person, whether it's the upfront in the conversation, says what her opinion is or his opinion is on something, and you hear your own words back, but in a different way, in their voice, that they've digested the information, they've come to their own conclusion, and they agree.
And that's really often that early feedback that the narrative that you've developed is in fact working, right? Because if the narrative is too complex, or we've made it more complicated than it needs to be, chances are they're not, either their interpretation of that back to you is going to be a big gap, right? In between what you said and what they said, or they're not even going to be able to do it because we've overcomplicated it, right? And so they can't distill it into their own, right? It's not like that light bulb hasn't gone off yet in terms of, oh, I get it. I get what you're saying and how this is going to benefit me.
And listen, simplicity is really hard. Simplicity,
yes, it
I
is.
think we like to overcomplicate, like you said, we like to overcomplicate things because we think we have to pack something into that little brown bag. We got to pack everything into it because maybe it makes us sound smart, or there's so many benefits. I want to talk about all the benefits, but distilling it down to really the simplicity is, I think, really powerful and not easy to do. And so, that is a constant challenge, especially, when you get to bigger companies and there's bigger strategies. I think simplicity is something, should be top of mind for everyone as they're thinking about how they're doing business, how they're messaging. I think that's what resonates with people. The overcomplexity is really just is a turnoff in my mind.
And it's a disservice to what we're trying, to our objectives and what we're trying to achieve. And yet, to your point, like we do this all the time, especially when it's something innovative, right? Because it's innovative, and boy, I really got to tell you how innovative it is,
Yeah.
right? So I'm going to come in with my PowerPoint, right, with all these words, buzzwords,
Yep.
etc. And yeah, I
Speeds and
think,
feeds. People's
yep,
eyes glaze over really quickly.
absolutely. Do you have any uh, sort of key learnings on that point of like how to get your, because sometimes it is like the marketing team can be nodding their heads that like, you know, we've talked about this for years, that simplicity is important,
Yeah.
and marketing can get it. Marketing can even be really good at executing it. But then when it goes for broader review with the, executive leadership or even a technical team, that's when some of this more complex jargon can come in. And do you have any sort of hard fought, war stories about how marketing was able to sort of convince and overwrite that desire to overcomplicate things?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably over the last 5 years, I've seen that probably play out best because I'm at a very large company in Verizon, not known to be a healthcare company. Where, in a lot of people's eyes, we're a utility. So leading the efforts around healthcare from a non-traditional healthcare player, that story has to be pretty tight and has to resonate pretty quickly. And there's a lot of stakeholders involved when it comes to a big company. So I think that's the biggest balance of understanding the priorities of teams, which is not always easy to do. But as much as you can do once you have your narrative and you've really looked at what are the trends, what's the data look like, what is the opportunity, really weave that narrative into what are the overarching goals of the company and where are there synergies that I can align to that will make this go through any large company a lot more seamlessly, because they all have their strategic plans, they all understand. But when you're at a company that works across every industry, it becomes even more important to understand your role, understand what you're trying to do, and then take the data of the major trends that are happening. And there's a lot happening in healthcare over the past 5 years, as we know, that have been just headwinds for things that around connectivity and devices and more, the whole industry is going this way. And that's an incredibly exciting place to be. But don't overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, it has to be anchored in why is this going to be important for our customers? That's, I
Yeah,
think, the anchor point for it always is for me.
that's such a great point about being, the role you sit in today in the organization that you're in today being, but one sort of industry vertical inside of a, massive organization. That's another layer of complexity that you're
Yep.
dealing with in terms of being able to communicate that value proposition, and all the more reason why simplicity is so important. And to take that a step further in this whole point is, I would argue that marketing needs to have a seat at the table on these decisions about not just building the narrative, right? But the entire strategy around how to make this adoption successful, so that, leadership inside of marketing can help, maybe override or overrule some of those tendencies to steer towards complexity
Yeah.
when that's not ultimately going to serve the objective or the brand. And so I think, there's this point here, which is we need to make sure that marketing leadership's role is being elevated, particularly in moments of, major change management, in key decisions around how this is going to get rolled out. What's your perspective on that?
100%. And I've been really lucky to have, now I have a great relationship with our marketing teams of how we're going to convey that messaging in a way that we hope and we think the market will respond to. But I haven't always had that. I've worked at far smaller companies where they're really, the marketing department was overstretched and didn't have much time for this. And so I think it's a balance. I mean, you're going to get the good and the bad. When you get that synergy between marketing at, like you said, at the table, I think it's critical because there's things that there's a viewpoint that marketing brings that a lot of other folks won't bring to the table. I mean, the business drivers are one thing that they have to be cognizant of, but how do you shape the messaging in a way, and what levers do you pull, and what channels are we going to distribute this on? That's all. That's in marketing sweet spot, and I think that oftentimes I don't think that gets elevated as much as it should, because in my mind it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree on that. Knowing that you've seen a lot of different and experienced a lot of different changes, across healthcare and frankly across marketing in your career, some of these examples that you are sharing are, maybe 10 years ago, give or take.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Has I'm not trying to say anything about either of our ages here, but has there been anything, as you look back at what it was like to do change management, say 10 years ago versus now, like, are these learnings the same? Has anything changed, or has most of the sort of best practices, if you will, in sort of leading through these times of changed pretty much the same?
No, I think in healthcare specifically, I think, if the to overuse, it's been overused, but the pandemic, I think, accelerated a lot of how quickly we perceive we can change.
Great point.
And I think in healthcare, not just specific to marketing, but in all the dynamics of healthcare delivery, digital health, all these things that were brought to bear out of necessity. My hope is that, not only was the door to innovation open, but the ability to know that change can happen quickly was it was a proof point. We did it. Even older folks adopted telemedicine. Go figure. People are able to do things.
It was literally forced upon us, right?
And we did it.
We did it. Yeah.
So I think I'm optimistic about that. And I think now more than ever, we know we have to change, because change, again, is being put on us through new technologies, and potentially through new legislation that's coming, and all the changes to the dynamics of the market. I think things are, this is just my opinion, but I think things are changing more rapidly than ever in healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. Great point. And I think you're right. I mean, the pandemic was that thing. It's just like literally overnight, all of these things changed. And we proved to ourselves that we were pretty resilient through that, right? And we built the muscle and we did the thing. We've all maybe got a few more wrinkles than we did before, but we did it. So I think we have the ability to potentially adapt faster to other change, but the change itself is also, to your point, happening at a faster pace. And so it's hard to even sort of calibrate whether or not we actually are more resilient, because the flywheel, right? Like the change is happening faster, and we all are also more resilient because we've been through it before. So it's a really interesting dynamic that we're in, for sure.
I do think I think you talked about this, like the attention economy that we're now find ourselves in, of which marketing plays a very leading role. Then that's changing too. I mean, it's can you get people's attention, but then, and I'm quoting you a lot, Sara, then I love the influence, earned influence, and how do you really, that's more important. I agree with you. That's more important than anything now, because as we've been in this attention economy, everyone's fighting for your attention. Attention spans have shortened. We all know that, with the rise of, some of the social media platforms that are super short form. They've risen to the top. Longer forms are more challenged, with definitely younger generations that are consuming things mostly on their phone. So I think we have to be super aware of the social dynamics at play as well. But I think to the earlier point, trust, influence go hand in hand. You're only going to be influenced if you trust that source, and that's a tough part to get to, but that's really what everyone's trying to get to. Everyone wants to be that trusted influencer, to to have folks listen and actually influence their change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Edelman's Trust Barometer just came out over the weekend, and I haven't had a chance to really dig into it yet. I did have someone from Edelman on last year to unpack the findings and the results there, hoping to do that again in an upcoming episode. But key headline there, and this won't surprise anybody.
Yeah.
Trust is down massively,
Yeah.
right? Trust of institutions is down significantly. And so
Yep.
Getting to that point of, having trust with customers, but also as a brand, being that sort of trusted, being in a place where you have trusted influence, it's harder. And on top of that, you have shorter attention spans too, right? So there's all these dynamics that are making that so much harder and so much more challenged, where this is that moment literally where the old playbook doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Robin, before we wrap, you're in technology. We got to talk about technology. There's just so much happening in healthcare, AI, broader digital transformation. What's a good, how this technology gets communicated is so incredibly important. How do we do that well, and make it understandable?
Yeah.
Both to, the B2B audience, the clinical audience, but all the way down to the patient level.
Yeah. There's so much happening and it's hard to keep up. I mean, AI is accelerating everything. And out of necessity, I think of any industry, healthcare really needs help because we don't have enough nurses and docs, right? So I think you need to automate more things. And I think that's it, right? Because doctors didn't go to, and nurses didn't go to nursing school or medical school to be data entry clerks. They went to those schools, very expensive schools and time, to be at the bedside delivering care. So I think any technology has to be grounded in how do we leverage these tools to lighten the load of this just cumbersome system of entering data and get them back to the bedside. And that is happening. So ambient listening is, a lot of people speak to that and point to that as something that's giving back nurses and docs time at the bedside. And, that's a great example because at the end of the day, patients don't want to see their doctor's face in front of a keyboard, not looking at them and not listening. We all have experienced that. So telling that story of, hey, the patient experience, the clinician experience are both improving through technology. And the story is that I can see my doctor face to face now. It's not that this is capturing the data and putting it in all the bells and whistles, speeds and feeds, take that out. And just the story is that one-to-one connection that's now being enabled through technology that is raising the bar of everyone's experience in that room.
Love that. Last question. What do you think is critical to getting through with clinicians as it pertains to rolling out adoption of some of these new technologies? To your point, they didn't go to school to use them.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people might think, well, I don't know that this is the best direction, for me to deliver my, the best medicine, if you will. What's your take on how to push through that resistance?
Yeah, it's not easy. Again, going back to the change conversation, but I think it has to be integrated into their workflows, has to be easy, has to have incredibly high value to the doctor. And I think if you boil it all down, the time of our clinician is the measure of, if I get more time back, if I don't have to chart at night in my pajamas, that is highly valuable to me. If we can give doctors back any time, that is something I think everyone can relate to. I want more time back in my day. If I adopt this digital tool or this AI or whatever technology it is, I get time back, I'm probably going to use it.
Love that. So great. Robin, thank you for being here today. Always a pleasure learning from you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sarah. This is great.
Yeah. And how can folks get in touch with you, Robin? Obviously, they should check out your podcast, Healthcare on Air by Verizon. Where else can how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I try to be pretty active there. Again, evangelizing what we're trying to do in healthcare. Thank you for shouting out the podcast. I try to get people on who are doing really interesting things in healthcare. So that's been fun. And then go to, if you want to Google anything about healthcare and what Verizon's doing, just Google Verizon and healthcare and you'll find a lot of resources.
Love it. And if people have guest ideas for the podcast, reach out to you on LinkedIn.
100%.
Love it.
Always open for ideas.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much again for being here. And to our listeners, if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. Thanks for listening to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time. What do you think is critical to getting through resistance with clinicians? What do you think is critical to getting through resistance with clinicians? What do you think is critical to getting through resistance with clinicians? What's your take on how to push through that resistance? What's your take on how to push through that resistance? What's your take on how to push through that resistance?